Welcome to the blind zone. What is the blind zone, you say? It's something that happens to you all of a sudden, or it's something you refuse to see that was right in front of your face. This morning, I have a good friend of mine, and she's going to talk about her sewing skills in a most unusual way. But I'll let her tell you how we got to know each other. Her name is Joyce, and so welcome, Joyce. And how exactly did we meet?
We met in a Bible study group, and the rest is history. It's been an interesting time that we spent together, and the relationships acquired have been lasting for sure.
Yes, because you were in my Thursday morning small group, and
hmm
we done a bunch of studies, and then the Holy Spirit told me to quit doing that, and then I went on to do this, and then I thought, oh, Joyce is a perfect complement to the Blind Zone because she has a skill set and a talent that obviously I don't have. I have no real talent, but for talking, so this is why I do that. So we're going to be talking specifically about sewing and
hmm
your skill in that area.
hmm
So how did you get interested in sewing, and what is the most elaborate thing you've ever sewed?
Oh, that's a big question, Denise. How I got into sewing was walking into a department store when I was 8 years old with my mother, and we were told, upon looking at me, which by today's standards I was not anywhere near as big as many. She said, "Oh, the Chubette department is in the back corner of the department store." And my
Uh,
mother walked me to the back, and she was bristling already. And seeing the one or two selections there, she just looked at me and said nothing. I mean, this woman had those hexagon wire rim glasses and her lips were pursed. And she said, "We're going to Kresge's Five and Dime to the fabric and pattern division." And that's what we did. And she said, "We're going to learn, I'm going to teach you how to sew." And that started it. And by 15, I was making my own clothes.
wow.
I
My
could
mother.
have bought them, but I wasn't, my whole style was just different, and
Mhm.
coming from the art side, that was, and I loved it.
Well, good for you because my mother would have said, okay, what do we got? She would have just been okay with it. But good for your mom for sticking up for you and for teaching you skills
Yeah.
that,
hmm
that obviously from then till now. So
Yep.
what was the most elaborate thing you've ever sewed?
Um, I had to think about it. There were five things: three prom dresses and two dress pairs of slacks for my husband, that he said were the most comfortable thing he ever had. And that really put the pressure on me because, I mean, men's slacks, dress slacks, especially with the special pockets and the whole 9 yards, is not an easy feat. But I had a neighbor
Mm-hmm.
that had done it, and we sewed together one day, and that took care of that. Prom dresses were interesting. They were all different, and my girls, I had two girls just a year and a half apart, actually less, and we're in high school at the same time. So, that was a lot of pressure too, because we were living on one income, and I was basically a stay-at-home mom, but I did do other things, very involved with my churches, and so it was
Mm-hmm.
a necessity. Necessity is the mother of invention, and that's kind of how it went from there.
Because uh, a million years ago, I had a neighbor and she used to sew wedding dresses, and I just marveled at that. And then, in fact, at one point, my ex-husband, we were going somewhere and his suit didn't fit. And she said, well, just bring it to me. And she took out every seam and I
Yeah,
was like, that's just a miracle.
yeah,
I mean, so I do really have kudos for people who could
yeah,
sew
yeah,
because I've had a lady who did alterations for me, and without her, my pants wouldn't have got hemmed, or I just have no skill
yeah.
set in that
Mhm.
area. So, what have you brought today to show people about some of your skill sets?
Well, considering I've been sewing since I was 15, and when I really got into it, we had friends that lived in the New York City area that were involved with the fabric industry. And there were new fabrics coming out, and they would load me up with some and say, make stuff out of this, see how it works. Not knowing if it would make a good dress or a better pair of slacks, that kind of
Mm-hmm,
thing.
mm-hmm.
So I did a lot of that, and I started taking lessons. You accumulate a lot of fabric over the years, and I've moved a lot, and much of it has been donated either to the church or to Goodwill, or just packages of things I just knew I wasn't going to use. And the rest of it got cut into strips for the most part. And so my thing became only within the past few years moving again, having all these 2.5 inch strips. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do with them? I can make just so many pot holders. So, and I did a lot of that too. And everybody needs pot holders. They get greasy and really crummy, and most people don't bother washing them. So I ended up with all these long strips that I sewed together, cut them in 7 or 8 inch squares. And then I put all the strips, I had all the strips against my sofa, and then just started laying them over my arm 4 at a time to see what looks good. And I came up with the split rail fence quilt design, which is a block that is horizontal and then alternately vertical.
This way, this way, this way.
And then placing them takes some time too. So this is what I ended up with doing. And if you look at them, I mean, there's Christmas fabric, there's camping designs, there's everything, strawberries, pea pods, you name it. But I pretty much did them according to their colors. And so I have one behind me that is more the lighter colors of the same type of exercise. And so I did with all that I came with when I moved down here. I came out with over 100 of 7 inch and 8 inch squares. Wow. And so I got 5 quilts out of them. And I have had them batted, backed, and quilted. And then I put on the what we call these scrappy quilts because they're from scraps. And yet when they, you take a lot of stuff and put it together, and some of them are so ugly they're beautiful. I mentioned that to the people that were quilting, and she laughed one day and she said, that is so true. And it is. But so are people. I mean, you put us all together and we're beautiful together as a group of people. So, and the one in this back one here was made also with strips, but it's more geometric, and I call it my jewel. When it's opened up, it's all my colors. I was a redhead, and it's already getting faded because I actually use it. But I have, I think, at least 6 of these finished quilts that will go out. And we've had so many floods over this past year and fires. And we had been through a large tornado when we lived in Texas at one time. And the one thing our pastor's wife said was, it's the things that you can't replace that meant so much. And so that's what gave me the idea of doing quilts, because it's something that's made specifically, with compassion and a purpose. And they are warm and they're comfortable. Some are warmer than others depending on the batting. But they're just bright, something pretty, something to just make you feel better.
And something that people can hang on to and know that somebody thought of them specifically and did it for them.
Yeah.
That, that's a big touch. And I will say, I hadn't heard the story. Well, I hadn't heard most of the story, but it's really interesting about people asking you to look at the fabrics, the new fabrics coming out. So what was one of the fabrics they gave you that is now in our average lineup of stuff that there hadn't been there before?
Well, you're talking about the very early 70s, very early. I mean, my girls were babies taking naps, and I'd sew. Double knits. Double knit fabric was something new, especially new when it was for skiers, for their ski pants.
Oh, okay.
There was stretch. Okay. And that was something new. And so it's like, what's best to work with this? And of course I did slacks. But in the middle of all this, I started taking lessons wherever we lived by reputable people that were with large sewing machine companies. And it was not just learning how to read a pattern and directions, but the technique of putting it together and how you could do it in such a way that it wasn't bulky or it would lay flat or this or that. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, things that nobody ever thinks about. They just know when they pull on a pair of slacks is comfortable or not, and so that kind of evolved from that. And all the technique is something that has been able to be used with anything I've sewn.
Well, because the minute you said that, the polyester suit flashed in
Mm.
my head.
Oh yeah, the plaid suits.
That's the plaid suits, and I'm like,
Yeah.
no, no, Joyce has got more sense than that. I'm sure she didn't
No, I
create
never did
this.
a plaid suit. No,
Thankfully, but
no.
well, because I remember trying on very inexpensive shorts, and I thought these are so uncomfortable. Now
Yeah.
they're the same things, the front, the back,
Hmm.
but there's a technique to that, obviously, because some shorts just, and I guess pants too, fit
It's
better than others, and
yeah.
and it is in the way you and I think it's the testimony to people who pay attention to the details,
Hmm.
how it's sewn,
Hmm.
and the comfort level that it
Yeah.
brings.
Years ago, the pattern to avoid, unless you were an expert sewer, was Vogue. And not so
Oh
much
yeah,
today, but
yeah.
Vogue patterns were not printed. You had to know what to do, where, and how. And that was the first pattern I used for one of my girls' prom dresses. And I'll tell you what, it was, I at least knew what to do, and I had enough
Mm-hmm.
behind me and to
Mm-hmm.
pull it
Mm-hmm.
off.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a piece of work, literally, and it was this shiny blue party taffeta, they called it, poofed out with 12 yards of netting on below the waist. I mean, it was unbelievable, but it was beautiful. It really was. And then my other daughter's was lace over taffeta, and then she reminded me yesterday when she says, "Mom, don't you remember the peach one with the one shoulder strap?" And I said, "Oh yeah." So I mean, I did these things. She did ask me to make her wedding dress when it was time, but my husband was so ill at the time, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't
Yeah.
do it.
Well, because I remember I did a brief stint of stowing, and I remember going into the fabric store. I think it was Joanne Fabrics or Minnesota Fabrics,
Mm,
and going to that big counter with all those books, and there was Butterick
yeah.
and Vogue and some other ones, and
Hmm.
just flipping through them. And in my head, I saw that, and I thought, oh, I could do that. I did not have the skill set for that. I didn't have the patience because this,
Mm.
this is my own. There was something and it was supposed to have a dart in it. I don't want to waste time doing that. Who will
Oh,
notice? Well, obviously,
yep.
And then I don't really want to have it, so I'd put the salvage at the bottom. So I didn't the whole,
Oh no. Okay.
exactly. I am the queen of the shortcuts, and in sewing that doesn't end well.
Shortcuts usually take you the long way around. That's
That's
right.
right. Yeah, I
Right.
learned that the hard
Right.
way.
Yep.
So now I know that within all of your sewing, you did turn it into a ministry
Hmm.
or mission work. So what are some of the ways that you've used your sewing besides the people in the floods and things like that? What other?
Well, floods, cancer.
Oh,
A good friend of mine was like a mother to me, and she did a lot of sewing, and we sewed a lot together, made things from time to time, and took lessons. But when she was dying, I had been on vacation and found this head cover actually in Kentucky. And I mailed it to her thinking, oh, by now her hair was pretty well fallen out.
mm-hmm.
And she loved it. And so when I got back home, I called the people in this shop where I was. It was a local talent kind of thing, artistry shop.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Is there a pattern for this? This is something that a friend of mine just loves." And she said, "No, she took 3 patterns to make this one." And she said, "Do what you want." This person had passed, and there was no restriction on it. So before she died, this friend of mine asked me specifically to take her head cover, take it apart, and she said, "You can make a pattern." I'd never made a pattern before, not like this. And and then I want you to make these, and I want you to give them away. And that's what we've done. I figure over the years, from what I sent up to her to for her daughter to give to her, groups that would give them out.
Mm-hmm.
I gave them to hospitals, personal friends that I knew were going through. I figured I made probably close to 1,000 by the time I was done.
Wow. So how many pieces were contained in the pattern part of that?
I believe I have to stop and think. five or six, something like that. It was like it was started out as like a scarf, but she wanted it adjustable. So the back, instead of tying in a knot, was done in such a way that you worked in a tube of elastic and you could adjust it.
Oh,
And
okay,
then we
okay.
would cover the back where you saw that. And I used the little cord stops, the pinch cord stops, so that you could either loosen it or tighten it. And those were donated to me when they found out what we were doing. I mean, by the hundred. A big
Mm-hmm.
corporation that I dealt with their clothing line. And so that was one. And she also was the one that came up with these rice packs, which have also become a ministry. It's nothing but a 10 and a half square, two pieces of fabric sewn together like a pillowcase, turn it inside out, stitch down, make four columns, and fill them three-quarters with rice and sew it shut. You put this in the microwave for 1.5 minutes, and it is a moist, very warm, wonderful thing on a sore shoulder or a sore knee. Feet in this winter when your feet are cold. I have neighbors now where I live that if I hear of somebody that has complaining of her achy shoulder or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll take these, I'll give her two, and I'll say, I've never had one returned. I mean, no, there isn't anyone that hasn't liked them. I have grandkids that take them to bed with them. And I would just give it to her and I put it in the microwave and then she'd put it on her shoulder and she said, "Oh, this is wonderful." And as you know, you're not supposed to keep any compresses for more than 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off. So they last a good 20 minutes, but they'll last for several years too. I tried to refill one once and that didn't work well, so because the fabric was getting burnt. I do use cotton because
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
polyester is apt to melt if you put it in the microwave.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, and
Yep.
then, but I also because when you were when we had our Thursday morning group, you gave one to everybody
Yeah.
sort of
Christmas. Yeah.
as a Christmas gift,
Yeah.
and so I have mine. But I also heard you say that you can also put them in the
Oh
freezer.
yeah, I keep
So
one in the freezer and one in the for the microwave. Yeah, the freezer, even at 0 degrees, they don't feel too cold. It makes no sense, but it really works. And it's I used one last night because I had a really bad knee and I slept, ended up really well. So,
mm-hmm,
but it's just
mm-hmm,
something that I make ahead. I keep them on hand because there's somebody I've given away several wherever I've lived. And I've even then I will get a call once in a while and say, "Hey, you still making those rice packs? I would love you to send me some. I'll pay you for the postage at least." And I've done that too. Mm,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
yeah.
So what other ministry things have you done?
We did one of the two of the churches that I've belonged over the years. I've moved around quite a bit. Um, Hospital chaplaincy was something that used to be, and I don't think is anymore at one point. It's like a White Cross. And they would have needs for either knitted things or sewn, anything for people that are in wheelchairs or bedridden. And we made, you wouldn't believe some of the stuff we made. And then also we would make, because nothing was disposable at this point either. A lot of the things we made were surgical masks and surgical caps, and we would send them overseas. Now, the surgical mask was interesting because I had forgotten about them, but still kept the patterns. And when the pandemic hit, I thought, oh, I have a pattern for that. And they were really pretty much the same, except that they were tied. They didn't use elastic. Their ears didn't become cauliflower after a while. It was terrible. Oh, it was awful. But yeah, anything that was needed, we made them. I mean, there's so many things. I can't even remember a lot of the stuff we made, but
Well, because I know when my husband was sick, the people at our church had made him a prayer blanket, and the beauty
mm,
part of that is that a variety of people sewed on it, and then they all prayed over it.
mm,
And so at night when he had it in his lap, he knew because he could touch the threads on it and
mm-hmm,
see who had prayed over it, and it was a very tangible
mm-hmm,
reminder of the people that were thinking of him.
mm-hmm.
And so I have to believe that like the quilts and the other things, that when they see them, they know that it represents somebody reaching out to them.
And many would sign their name on something like that too.
Oh,
They will
okay.
sign their name on the square that maybe they designed. That's very
Mm-hmm.
common. Another church I worked, we also made things for our overseas missionaries that we fully supported. And there was a request for pillows. We had a pediatric surgeon that worked overseas in one of the Eastern hospitals. And he said, we need pillows for these kids. And so we came up with not just a pillow, but a large, flat, stuffed doll. And we dress them with shirts and shorts for boys and dresses for girls. I mean, and faces and hair, yarn hair, the whole thing. We had a big group and we did all that. And we would make up to 300 and send them over each year. And then
So how big were the dolls?
they were just big enough for a small child because he was pediatric and mostly little children. They were maybe no more than a foot long and maybe about 10 inches wide. But they were, had arms and legs, nothing elaborate, but they were
Mm-hmm.
stuffed,
Mm-hmm.
chubby, and
Mm-hmm.
then clothed. But then I said, well, when they leave the hospital, they need something to take it home with. So I made 300 tote bags, little totes. But I used one of the women's daughters who was like 3 years old at the time. And I said, stand up and I want you to hold this. I don't want to drag on the ground, that kind of thing. So that I still, and I still make those now. If I go down to collect my mail, I have one of these, same thing. But I make tote bags too. Mm.
Well, because my cousin and I, many, many, many years ago, we came up with something called Cousin Cares, and we came up with a doll that was the height of like a 2-year old,
Oh.
and
Mm-hmm.
and it had the same thing. We had two T clothes on it, and it was supposed to be like your pew pal or
Mm-hmm.
your buddy that you took to the doctors with you, because and it had a
Mm-hmm.
bag with all. Anyway, that's really interesting because ours didn't come out as cute as we were hoping, and nothing ever came of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm really glad because that was an idea that I think that if kids have something that's relatable to them, that I think that they do feel better, heal better, trust
Mm-hmm.
more. Huh.
Kids like to have something to go to bed with. There's a comfort. Like I say, my grandkids would warm one of these rice packs up and take it to bed with them,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and it's. But also, I mean, I've been on a few mission trips. We did a mission trip down in the Dominican Republic, and when one woman was going to make a bunch of these little tiny dolls stuffed with no faces, no nothing, and I said, I don't think so
Yeah, that
because
looks like a voodoo doll,
it
doesn't
looks
it?
like a voodoo doll. I said, we cannot take those with us on this trip. No, not in the Caribbean. No. She was kind of hurt because her heart was in the right place and she wanted the
Right,
kids to have something
right,
special just for them. But,
right.
that did not work.
No,
So we
no,
had to be careful. We had to really
yeah,
think about where we're going and what we're
that's right.
making. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
there's a
yeah,
practicality because the
yeah.
church I used to belong to, they sewed mosquito netting
Oh,
for,
wow.
and they had whole kits and stuff like that, and that was a really great idea because again, you're
Oh,
looking
yeah,
at the environment that you're going in
yeah,
and figuring what these people need, and dolls might be fun, but mosquito netting can save their life if it keeps them from
right.
getting malaria. So,
Yeah.
those are all very practical things. And
Mm.
again, if your heart's in the right place, but it ends up being
The wrong
the
thing.
wrong thing, then it's
Yeah.
still just the wrong thing
Yeah,
overall.
yeah. We had to think, and even going in the Middle East too, we had to think about, what's the protocol? What are some of the things we should not do? What's okay? What's not?
Mm-hmm,
And go
mm-hmm,
from there. Yeah,
mm-hmm,
yeah.
mm-hmm.
You have to be careful. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
is there anything else before we wrap this up? Because this has been fabulous. Because again, understanding how you came to start this, and then the fact that you took lessons to get better at this, and then you looked around to see how what you knew could help
Hmm.
others, that that really speaks a lot to your character and the fact that you want to make a difference, and
Hmm.
that's how you do it. Now, again, there's two things. If I said I liked somebody and was going to bake them something, they would think I did not like them at all. That's not a skill set of mine. And again, if I sat down with a needle and thread, no, 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 they would think that I didn't care for them at all. So I really do applaud your effort to try and make these things for other people, because you could make all this stuff for yourself and just,
Hmm.
you know, hoard it. And, you know, I don't
And I've
agree.
made quilts for my daughters, their wedding quilts, and all my
Mm-hmm.
grandkids have
Mm-hmm.
had,
Mm-hmm.
what I call speculative quilts that were lessons that I took, and for a quilt, a specific type. But otherwise, I'm I've been around so much illness from early childhood with family and friends that I just have so much compassion for these people, and how much something bright and happy and something that is just useful. I don't like to make cutesy things. I make things that have purpose. And so it just, you need to smile. I like when people look at what I've done. I like them to smile. I don't want to think,
Mm-hmm.
ooh, that's dark and dreary, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm all about, well, I was a redhead. I'm all about lots of color. I just love color.
Well, frivolous would not be a way that I would ever use to describe you. And so I like that you're practical, pragmatic, but that you also have a generous, gentle side to you,
Mm,
that you want the best for other people.
mhm,
And it can happen through the things that you've sown for
mhm.
them, you know, and that again says a lot
Yeah.
about who you are.
And the
So,
family has always cheered me on too. That
mm-hmm,
counts for a lot too. And
mm-hmm,
friends, oh Joyce, you can do that, and it's something new I wanted to learn or something. Go
mm-hmm.
ahead, mom, it'll work out okay. And it always does, usually.
Yeah. So, but you're not taking any current lessons now. You're just using all the
I've given
knowledge.
lessons actually.
Oh,
Oh
really?
yeah, I when I was part up in New England, I was part of the extension group, and I did some teaching. They would rather watch me sew than try and go back to their machines and work, together. But also sewing teaches lots of biblical mindsets, patience, lots of patience. I've had to take things apart, knowing if I didn't take it completely apart, no matter how tiny that stitch, it had to come apart. I had to reset it and resew it, or it just would never be right. I'm a perfectionist that way. Good, bad, it can haunt you sometimes, but
Mm-hmm.
patience and obedience. You gotta read the directions. People don't. You like to take off. Oh, I've done this. Oh, I've sewn for many years. I don't need to look at the directions. Well, that doesn't always end well either. So yeah, patience and obedience is really a biggie.
Okay. Well, see, now you just hammered the nail there for me, Joyce. What two things why I couldn't do sewing? Patience and obedience. I'm obedient in a lot
You're a
of other
good prayer
areas, but
warrior,
yeah,
Denise.
that's it. That I do that really
Yeah,
well, but again, I don't need to put in that dart. Who's going to see that? Anyway, so sewing isn't my great skill set, but I could talk a good game. Anyway, I really have appreciated this, Joyce, and the things you do for the people that you do it for. Your legacy will live on long after you're gone. People will still have those things in their
yeah,
home, and
yeah,
they'll fondly remember where they came from, and how it touched their lives,
mhm,
and they'll spread those stories. So that'll be your legacy,
yeah.
which is a really good thing. Anyway, thank you. This has been a fabulous The Blind Zone, and we'll see you next time. And again, I don't tell you what's coming up next because I have no earthly idea. Anyway, see you next week on The Blind Zone.